Welcome to your reading. For each reading that I do, I try to pick and choose what I'm going to focus in on, intuitively by looking at the charts, by hearing what the person is, experiencing in their life, what they might need, some information about. So for you and your situation and your charts, I chose to focus on Chiron, the nodes of the moon, and your design Mars, which is our core wound, or our, a part of our pre-birth wounding along with Chiron. So those are the things I'm going to be talking about today. For your reading, let's see, where do I want to start? Okay, so I want to start with your astrology. You have Chiron in Leo in the 10th house, and it's retrograde. The first thing I want to say is that with Chiron retrograde, one thing that we could say about people with that is that they're natural born healers. With Chiron and Leo, there can be a wounding around play, creativity, or self-expression. Those are the themes for Leo. And then with it being in the 10th house, that wounding around play, creativity, or self-expression will be manifesting mainly through your career or public role, which is what the 10th house rules. And then the next thing I looked at was your nodes. You have the south node, which is in the green circle, the top green circle, in Cancer in the 10th house. So in this lifetime, our nodes are what we're here to learn, how we're here to grow as an individual. So you're going from someone who's learning about measured vulnerability in your public life or through your career, and then learning, going from that past life and childhood and younger adult life orientation to over the course of your life learning how to have mastery or integrity in your career or public life via the understanding and fully feeling of your emotions, your dreams, anything, any type of subconscious content is gonna, having an understanding and tapping into that subconscious content is gonna allow you to, over time, begin to have this mastery or integrity in your career or public life. And when I say mastery, what I'm talking about is, you knowing what, whatever you want to do for your career or whatever you're here to do as your purpose, that, you know it inside out, you have mastery of it. And then the integrity piece would be that whatever you do for a career or in your public role, in your public life matches, your true interests, the things that really light you up versus just doing work for a paycheck and things like that, which it sounds like that's what you're attempting to do right now. I know that you mentioned that you left your job and you're trying to make it doing what you love. So this is a perfect example of that. So that's the astrology piece. And then I want to move on to, for now, to your body graph, and we'll see how this ties into that. So let's look at your personality Chiron, because that's what what's being shown in your astrology chart as your personality Chiron. And that's in gate 31, which is one of the throat gates. So, to me, when we think about those Chiron themes of wounding around play, creativity, or self-expression, the throat is where we express. It's also where we manifest. We bring into form whatever we're trying to create, whether that's through words or physical manifestation or whatever that might be. But the shadow of gate 31, which is your Chiron personality, is arrogance. So with that shadow, there can be a perceived inability or ability to lead or influence others through our words, which ties back to the self-expression. Leo, the archetype of Leo represents the developmental stage of our teen years. We're surrounded by our peers. We're trying to figure out who we really are, trying to, fully develop, put the final touches on our personality. And, we want to be seen. We want to be recognized. But because we're not really strong in that identity yet, we have a lot of, fears. Our sense of ego is still really fragile. Because we haven't matured into adults yet. I'm not saying that this is you. I'm just saying archetypally, this is the developmental stage that Leo represents. So with this stage, there's a lot of insecurity around, who we really are and how we express that. And if you remember back to the time when you were a teenager, when we're all teenagers, we're so concerned with what other people think and how, they think about us, if they're going to judge us or not. Sorry, I'm just reading my notes here. Yeah, so that, some of that can be still happening in the shadow state, even as an adult, some of those dynamics around the Leo archetype. With this gate 31, the shadow is arrogance, and the energy can be expressed through false humility as well, or the giving of one's power over to others for fear of being perceived as arrogant, or, contrasting that through scorn, through believing that you are better than others. So that's the shadow. It's arrogance, not wanting to be perceived as arrogant, as a leader, as, claiming of one's power, or conversely through the opposite side of that, believing that you're better than other people, or wanting, basically trying to have power over other people. Now, if we take your Chiron in combination with your nodes, this could manifest as fears about authentically expressing yourself in your public life or your career, going from that space to, over time, over the course of your life, learning how to have integrity in your career or public role through the examination of your subconscious, your dreams, your feelings, anything ruled by that fourth house, north node. Okay, I'm going to move on to gate 33 now. This is your design Chiron, and it's also in the throat center. I want to mention here that I see that you have a completely open throat, and we know that with the undefined or open throat, there can be a propensity, especially when you're younger, before you've gained the wisdom of life, to try to talk a lot to gain the attention, that everybody needs. We all need attention, but this is one strategy that the open throat can use. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I want to read the shadows from the Gene Keys book on this specific gate. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So let me find them. Okay, and you probably already have this. I believe you have the Gene Keys book, or maybe the audios on this, but I just wanted to read them because I thought it was going to be important for this reading. So the reserved, or excuse me, the repressive nature for the 33rd shadow is someone who's reserved. So it says, these are extremely hidden people. They find it very difficult to communicate with others and often cannot break out of their own silence. They may have the experience of being forgotten by the world. Their natural tendency is to simply hide from people, and they usually find all kinds of ways to do this. In their work, through an enforced discipline or life choice, by living in isolation or far from others, or simply through a deep psychological insecurity that keeps them in a kind of torpor or numbness. These people find it very difficult to stay in relationships since intimacy demands that they come out of their shell. And I like this word shell that Richard Rudd used because it ties in really nicely with your Cancer nodes. Cancer is the sign of the crab. And, we think of how the crab operates. It lives inside the shell, and sometimes it pokes its little claws and head out. And that's exactly how cancers operate. They're like, they test the waters. Is it safe for me to be vulnerable with this person? And they might share a little bit, and then they retreat back into their shell. And then depending on how the person responded, they're like, oh, well, they responded in a healthy way, so now I can share more in the future. Or conversely, if they're not, they didn't respond in a healthy way, I'm not going to share any more with this person. I'm not going to be vulnerable with them. So anyways, let me get back to the reading. When they do finally begin to awaken, they can surprise both themselves and others with how much wisdom they have absorbed over the course of their life or lives. And then the reactive nature of Gate 33, it says, rooted in anger, the reactive side of the 33rd shadow will express itself as invasive behavior pattern that unconsciously tries to provoke reactions in others in order to not feel alone. The nature of this pattern is censorship. These people can be adept at understanding the emotional blocks that keep others in a state of forgetting. Thus, they try to get attention by pointing out the negative patterns of others, sometimes under the guise of helping them. This almost always achieves the desired reaction of anger from the other person. However, this way of getting attention is obviously extremely self-destructive and unsatisfying. It leads to a buildup in the resentment from others and creates more anger until an inevitable explosion ensues. Sorry, I can't talk this morning. When these people learn to break their pattern of projecting their rage onto others, they finally begin to remember what it is like to love and be loved. And we know in psychology that how do I want to say this? The invulnerable side of sadness can be anger. People can want to provoke anger in others or use anger themselves in a reactive way to others' thoughts, words, or behaviors, because it allows them to maintain, that sense of control, that sense of, well, I have this crab shell on my back and I can just retreat back into here and be safe, and I don't have to be truly vulnerable. So with the reactive nature, that's what's going on with that one. They want the attention, but they don't consciously know how to get it in a healthy way yet. I say yet, because these are things that we learn over the course of our life. Let's see. Okay, and then so the wounding of the 33, which it sounds like is being ignored or not getting attention, can only be healed through learning how to be intimate with ourself, which again ties back into your nodes, which is about tapping into that unconscious, to your emotional responses, your emotional reactions, the behavior patterns around those emotions. And then, the processing, the eventual processing of those emotions, which ties into gate 1, which is your design Mars, or your core wound. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, so gate 1 is in the G center, and you have that gate activated. And as we know, the G center gives us our sense of love, which always begins with a self. We can't really get love from others if we don't have love for ourselves first. Our sense of direction, our sense of identity, that's another big one. And then working on your Chiron wounding will help to give you a direction that you need in life. If you work on that subconscious material in the 4th house, so you're, instead of being reactive, we want to truly understand for the first time why we're behaving as we do, and we begin watching ourselves, which is what happens with gate 1. In gate 1, the shadow is about the sanskaras, or the genetic, energetic, memories that we carry in our energetic bodies from past lives, and how we need to work through that stuff, because if we don't, we're just going to keep, replaying the same patterns that we developed because of that. So when we're unconscious, we're just reactive, right? We're just reacting out of whatever desires and needs that we have, and not understanding what those are. We just keep creating the same old dramas and traumas. Let's see. If you can, I would go back and read or listen to Gene Key 1. You have that as part of your incarnation cross, so this is going to be for you a lifelong learning process, and part of your purpose, part of what you're here to do in this life and what you're here to learn, which, again, we saw that in your nodes. And the reason I say that is because with gate 1, we are learning how to properly process energy. And this ties into all areas of life, how we're processing creative energy, which, is going to filter into the work that we do, how we're processing emotional energy. And for me, in my personal experience, nothing I haven't been able to find, my personal version of success until I started processing this energy correctly. Because, gate 1 is the first hexagram and it's in the G center. So if we don't have this right, if we don't know how to process source energy correctly, then our direction in life is going to be lost, because that gate 1 is in the G center. We're not going to know what our true direction is if that if that energy is processing us, if that energy is handling us, our emotional energy, our creative energy, whatever energies that we have access to are handling us and we're not handling them, that's where we get into trouble, because then we're not in control. We're just acting unconsciously. In Gene Key 1, he talks a lot about the reasons for this and how to process that energy correctly. I want to talk specifically about emotional energy because you have your solar plexus open, and you also have your, let's see, so you have 3 centers open, and for me, I feel like the centers that we have open with no gates active on them are always the ones where we're learning the most wisdom. These are always the hardest ones to navigate. So, especially in combination with your nodes and looking at your life trajectory and what you're here to learn, combining your nodes with your incarnation cross, for you it's going to be really important, and your success in your career is going to depend on going into those places of pain, those places of emotional energy that not many people want to go into, to really understand what's happening. So that means learning how to properly process your emotions. And, this isn't something that we're taught, most of us anyways. We're not lucky enough to be taught that. We have an emotion arise and we try to go up into our head and say, oh, how can I fix this? How can I get rid of it? Which only makes the problem worse, which is what Richard talks about in Gene Key 1. He talks about how when we have this melancholic energy, this mutative individual energy, which gate 1 is in the individual circuitry. When we have that come online, when we're in the low part of our wave, if we have emotional definition, that we just don't know what to do with that. Like, well, why is this unhappiness here? This doesn't feel good. This isn't supposed to be here. But when we can understand and surrender to and embrace the fact that, yes, this is a natural part of life and it is supposed to be here, I guess what people would call the more unpleasant or negative emotions are just a part of life. And when we allow those emotions to arise and we understand what to do with them, then the sadness, the anger, whatever emotion we have, it basically takes care of itself. There's nothing that needs to be done with it. If we have the emotion come up and we just fully let it into our bodies, and we can process it through our bodies, and then later we can question it with our minds instead of trying to get rid of it or try to understand it from the get-go. That's creating more entropy or more loss of energy, which is the shadow of gate 1 is entropy, which takes a toll on our body and our health over time. But I don't want to ramble on and on too much about this one, but when the emotion arises, just feel it fully, let it into your body. If this isn't something that you know how to do yet, if you weren't raised with healthy parents, or you haven't been to see a therapist, just let the emotion come, let it, feel it fully, because that way it totally releases. It doesn't get trapped in your body and have to resurface later. And then you can bring your mind in and question it and say, okay, well, what was this about? Was this, because emotions are always about one of two things. They're about a story. We're talking about painful emotions because that's where people struggle the most. They're okay with happiness and joy, and we don't even have to question those things. We're like, ooh, I want more of that. So, when the painful emotions arise, after we process them, we can take it to our mind and say, okay, was it about a painful story or a need that was unmet? And if it's about a painful story, then we can analyze, okay, well, was the story true or not? And if the story was true and the pain, was about something that, affected us deeply, that's where we can come in and we can self-parent and we can have real compassion for ourselves, because we felt the emotion fully, and then that way we can feel the compassion. If we don't feel the emotion, we can't have the compassion, because you have to be able to feel the emotion to understand it, and to know what that is, and then to have that self-love and empathy around that. So, that's one way it can go. And even if it's about a need that's been unmet, instead of a story, you can still reparent and say, oh, this is not right, that this need has gone unmet, and I would feel the same way in your instance, and I'm sorry that you have to go through this and feel this way. And then we can look for, okay, well, what need was unmet? If we have knowledge of the basic human needs, we can look and see what that was, and then actively come up with strategies for trying to get that need met. And that way we've regained control of that emotional energy instead of it controlling us. Now we know what to do. Now, we know, okay, well, if it was an unmet need, there's something I can do about that. Either I can meet my need or I can ask somebody else to meet my need. If it was about a painful story, I can do something about that. I can feel compassion for myself, and I can send love towards myself, or I can share my story with another person, and they can validate those emotions for me. But when we try to, we don't want to feel the emotion, and we're like, no, I don't want to feel this fully because it's super scary, right? As children, if we're not taught, if our parents don't sit with us in our big scary emotions, we fear that we will be annihilated by them, and that's terror producing for a child. So if our parents didn't help us with that as children, we grow up as adults carrying around that that inner child who still fears those heavy emotions and feels like they're going to be annihilated by those emotions. And then we create even more entropy in our life. We don't know who we are. We can't love ourselves. All of these open or undefined G-center problems that people with, the center open or undefined struggle with. So yeah, that first gene key is a big one, and I feel like understanding the basics of the energy and how to use it properly, it's going to affect your destiny. It's going to affect the outcome of your whole life. your health, your relationships, your work and career. So getting that, understanding that, and then doing the work that's needed to again, like I said, handle that energy before it handles you is super important. Especially for you, again, because you have like the first gate in your incarnation cross. So this is part of your life purpose. This is what you're here to do, and it shows it not only in your incarnation cross, but the nodes of your astrology chart. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say, except that being a reflector, I know that reflectors are probably the people that have the capacity to develop the most wisdom in this lifetime. I don't know if you're familiar with Teal Swan, but she's a reflector. I've heard she's a reflector. And, the amount of wisdom that she has from the things that she's been through, with all of her openness, and how she's been able to help so many people, including myself, through that, through the understanding of basic psychology and how we need to start working on all this stuff. So, thank you for allowing me to read for you. I hope that this reading helps you in some way, that, to be able to get to that wisdom faster, because that wisdom is so needed in this world. It's a world starving for wisdom. Oh God. Well, that's the understatement of the year. Anyways, yeah, I hope this helps. And if you have any questions or any feedback, I'd love to hear those. So again, thanks for allowing me to read for you. Take care. Bye.